Anil Gupta is chair in strategy and entrepreneurship at the University of Maryland's Business School. He joins us now in the studio to explain more of what's happening here. You know, the EU, Canada, all crying foul, saying this is U.S. protectionism, China calling for restraint. But are we seeing the beginning of a trade war here?
Well, I mean, I think we have to see what happens next week. And I think there's a better than 50% chance that actually what Mr. Trump may do maybe not exactly the same as what he signaled he might do yesterday. You know, that's because within the White House itself, there is far from any agreement. In fact, there are, serious disagreements. So if you just look at, Gary Cohn and others, versus Wilbur Ross and Peter Navarro and Robert Lighthizer, even you look at Jim Mattis. So within the White House, in the cabinet, there is disagreement. You look at the Republican Party, you look at the pushback from Europe, pushback from Canada, from Japan, from South Korea, from Mexico. So I think we have to see what happens. And, in fact, with this White House, what we have seen in the past 1 year is that what happens at the end of the day is not necessarily what the president signals might happen. So we have to see.
He's certainly riled a lot of countries up, but even if he brings those numbers down from 25 and 10%, even if it's just a fraction of that, that's still something, isn't it?
Yes. And so I think, just firstly, any type of a broad brush, let's say on all steel or all aluminum worldwide, that's like using a sledgehammer. And a sledgehammer approach, by definition, especially when we are talking about trade, is a terrible approach. So yes, of course, when it comes to steel and aluminum, yes, U.S. has a significant trade deficit for sure. And then if you look at, in terms of which countries have overcapacity in steel and aluminum, China is right up there in terms of. But then, just because those two simple facts are true, doesn't mean that China is necessarily a major source of the problems for the U.S. steel industry or the U.S. aluminum industry. So therefore, this is like using a sledgehammer. You need to be much more targeted if you are concerned about it to figure out where really does the problem lie.
Is there a chance they have no idea what they want to introduce? There's been a lot of back and forth. That's the first question. And, secondly, what does this do with China's trade relationship with the United States? This is just one of a couple of other things that have been happening in recent weeks.
Yes.
What does it do there?
So I think, on this particular issue, if we say what does it do, and it being, the steel and aluminum tariffs that the president has signaled, I think there China is much more likely to really kind of take a back seat because the pushback from Canada, pushback from Europe, pushback from Mexico, basically other partners is going to be stronger because in any case, exports of steel and aluminum from China to the U.S. or in terms of the U.S., what percent of steel and aluminum imports come from China, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal for China. Actually, it turns out also not a big deal for the U.S., but it is a big deal for other countries. So I think what China will do here is essentially ride on the coattails of what the other trading partners do. In terms of U.S.-China relationship, I think the bigger issue is not really about trade, but it's really about reciprocity. And that's what U.S. should be pushing for in terms of that is China as open to our companies as the U.S. is open to your companies? Because that's a fair argument to make. I think that's the argument that should be made rather than focusing on steel and aluminum trade.
We will have to see what turns up later this week. Anil Gupta, always great to hear your side.
Thank you very much.